data is the foundation of AI. Without quality data, you don't have quality AI.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Paige, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI.
What if your data pipelines came with a set of promises, clear, measurable guarantees that protected quality, ensured consistency, accelerated decision-making? Our guest today pioneered that very concept and even wrote a book about it. Known as the father of data contracts, Andrew Jones saw before most that align producers and consumers around these explicit agreements would transform how we trust and use data. Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have special guest, returning guest, Omar Shanti, CTO of HatchWorks AI, joining us as well. Welcome, Omar.
At this point, am I even a special guest?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think you are. You're we gotta drop the special. You're just I'm
just there.
A regular figure now. All right, guys. Well, I want to kick it off here because data contracts, this was a new thing to me. I know, Omar, you have gone deep on this with Andrew, and I'm excited for a little bit of back and forth there. But I think for the audience, like, take us back to when this first idea emerged. Like, what problem were you seeing in organizations that sparked the need for this thing? And what is it?
Yeah, so the initial problem I was trying to solve. So I worked in an organization, we were using data, but we wanted to use our data for more and more important applications. So like we can use our data to drive ML models that would actually provide product features that drive revenue. So we had this aspiration as part of our strategy. It was a clear goal of the company, but our data wasn't really reliable enough to do that. Like our data regularly, the schema changed, kept breaking things downstream. And this is just our BI applications. And we felt if our BI applications are not reliable enough, built on the same data, then how would these ML applications be reliable enough to sell to customers if it's built on the same data? So that was a real initial problem I was trying to solve. And I started thinking about a problem, because it did various things like observability and alerting and things like that, but that didn't really seem to solve the problem. What I felt would solve the problem would be maybe a bit more like using an API like we do in software engineering. Like I thought the problem was really we're building on top of a database directly. We're using change data capture to get data from database into the data warehouse. So we're building directly on database directly, the same schemas, those schemas kept changing. Therefore, I felt if we're going to keep building on the same source, there's not much we can do to make it more reliable. We need some sort of interface there. So that's kind of where it came from. And then I thought, well, to create an interface, I need to be able to describe it, a bit like an API spec. So I created one of those. And I thought, well, actually, if I've got this document describing the data and it's both human and machine readable, actually, there's loads more I can do with that. I can start putting things in there to help with data governance. I can start putting things in there to help with access controls. I can start using that as a document where consumers and producers can discuss around and agree and become like a requirements document as well, and documentation. I started thinking, well, actually, all of these things are possible now at describing our data in sufficient detail through this data contract. So that's kind of where it came from. It started off as a simple, well, it's a simple idea, describe the data. But once you realize you can do that, and once you realize you can put almost anything in there, then it can become very powerful. And it solved my interface problem, describe the interface, and now we'll end up using it to solve many other problems as well.
And just to like simplify it for the audience, like, are there a few like core tenets that you define around data contracts that take it a step further there?
Yeah, so to simplify it, and because since data contracts have become more well known, people use it to solve different problems, and it can do that. It can solve many different problems, not just the interface problem I was trying to solve. But basically, a data contract, it contains metadata about the data, so metadata, and it describes that in a human and machine readable format, so something like YAML or JSON or something like that. It doesn't really matter. So that's all a data contract is, and then you can use it for various solutions. So the interface idea, you could put data quality checks in there and have them run by a platform. You can put documentation, you can put governance, you can put categorization of data and personal data and data retention, like whatever problem you need to solve, once you have this document that contains the metadata, you can use that to power any kind of solution.
Yeah, I'm curious, like this is bringing me back to like some, I'll call it nightmares of like sitting in a conference room, going through this huge spreadsheet of all of this data and defining, okay, what is this? What is that? And the reference I'm thinking of is back in my days at like AT&T and in the telecom side. And not only did we not know what the data was, there was duplicate data all over the place. So I'm curious, like, what's Omar? Maybe we'll start with you. Like, what's your biggest like nightmare moment from the past that like data contracts resolves? And then Andrew, I'm curious what I'm sure you have several, but like, or maybe even within a client, don't mention the name that you've seen where it's just like this pain point that exists.
Sure. I'll give a broader answer and then I'll drill in. I had the luxury to work at an organization that was a bit decentralized in its data acquisition practice. And what that meant is individual teams were autonomous to go out into the marketplace, purchase large amounts of data. These corpuses could be anywhere from the 6 figures upwards. And what we ended up seeing was a lot of these individual teams were purchasing the same data sets. So to sort of fictionalize the example, imagine 8 different teams purchasing the Nielsen annual report for things like TV and household sort of consumption practices. Now, at a smaller scale, that's not too bad. But if you see that is the rule rather than the exception, that these teams are investing so much in purchasing, curating, maintaining these data sets in a silo, then you sort of realize, okay, we need more communication across them. Now, that's not necessarily the problem that data contracts needs to solve, but it's important to recognize that data contracts fit into that broader arena of data governance. Data contracts is sort of a very key and specific sort of solution in the space of data governance. And as Andrew mentioned earlier, others such as monitoring data observability, data quality, having a data catalog rich with metadata, all of those are basic hygiene things that could have helped with the problem that I just mentioned. So that one stands out as just a really sort of commonplace issue that many Fortune 500 companies might face. But something unique to data contracts has to come down to, I would say, schema changes. So I love what Andrew was mentioning earlier, that in his org, he sort of felt hamstrung in the sense that you can't increase the importance of the model without increasing the reliability of the data. The more important the model, the more valuable that data reliability is. And something like an upstream schema change breaks it. Something like changing the semantics so that height is now measured in feet rather than meters, or how an address is represented, that risks breaking the whole application. So in practice, I've seen it happen where a citizen developer within a company was empowered to make a change to the schema and ended up tanking a production critical application, which was sort of a BI visualization layer. So ultimately, something like data contracts comes in there and it puts in a very clear sort of spec as to what a schema should look like. It's sort of a commitment, hence the word contract, and there's accountability sort of caked in there, as well as practices around how you can go about issuing a change. So what we sort of call change management.
Yeah.
And I think that's the perfect example, because in that case, this production grade downtime would have been avoided.
Yeah. Good old shadow IT. I've never been guilty of that before in my life. Andrew, what about you? You got a horror story for us?
Yeah, I think most commonly it's change management, like I was saying.
Yeah.
That's these problems to solve with data contracts. But I've seen it used in other places. Governance is a particularly common one. So in regulated industries, you just need to have better data governance, like what data is person data or not, how do you handle data retention, how do we make sure the data doesn't go across borders if it's not supposed to, across territories. And those kind of things we captured in the data contract, and platform can then automate put those policies into practice through the platform. So that's quite a good one. Another one I'm seeing a bit more unusual, but quite good actually, is that there's when I'm not saying like getting data from third parties. Well, this was a big company. They had a lot of subcontractors, and they needed to get data from those subcontractors back to them so they could put it together and create a report for regulation again. And they were thinking about how they can create a data contract that can cross this into becoming a real contract, part of a contractual agreement, where they provide data in a specific format to the company who's hiring these subcontractors, make sure they get the data they need collected in one single place in the same format from different subcontractors across different countries, so they can create a clean data set they provide to regulators, particularly around, this one was around carbon data for government. So there's kind of like pulling data from other people. We're still using data contract to formalize that agreement and making sure you're getting data in the right format of right quality.
Yeah, and going back to Omar, a point you had, it kind of triggered in my head because I feel like one of these core tenets of data contracts is this almost this decentralization approach to it. You're almost productizing the data in a sense to where people can rely on the data, go get the data accurately. But you also mentioned shadow IT. That's like the negative version of that, where people are kind of spinning up their own things. But curious, like how do you avoid, even with data contracts, this like utopian view of like this decentralized federated data contract world, but avoid it like drifting into kind of shadow IT and stuff still kind of going off the rails?
I think this conversation dovetails nicely with broader conversations around self-service. Whether you're looking to enable like self-service data analytics, which people these days often associate with something like a data mesh, or whether you're talking about enabling more self-serve access to development, so autonomous teams decentralized, what you end up wanting to do is create standards in a central location that bring together sort of the best minds in the organization to create sort of single set of practices everyone ought to follow. These should be responsive, not overly prescriptive, but they should sort of do a lot of the work of keeping these teams in sync. And then you decentralize that out. So rather than have the team that understands the domain rather than have the team that understands the tech stack do all of the technological work, the idea is let's have this team that understands the tech stack come up with a set of standards and a set of reusable tools that they can then send elsewhere so that others can sort of do that work. And you might think of this as think of maybe a chef might know very well how to operate a fryer. They know how to bring the oil up to the perfect temperature. They know how to get those fries right every single time. But it's difficult to scale that, right? You can't have this one chef now serves 300 restaurants. So instead, that chef might work with someone to build a machine to fry products for you. And then you can decentralize that machine as a sort of reusable tool across the org. Now, if it's too prescriptive, then that opens up some challenges. If it's not prescriptive enough, then that also opens up some challenges. So figuring out how to really thread that needle is where that technology part really interlocks with the people and the processes within an organization. Andrew, that's the way I think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on that delicate balance.
Yeah, no, I love that. I completely agree with that. I love the metaphor as well. Like that was there from the start of data contracts for me as well. Like when I was thinking of data contracts, I was thinking, oh, it's the same sort of time the data mesh articles came out, original ones. And I was thinking, yeah, that explains my problem very well. And I like the way the solution is sort of shaped there. Although I didn't think I could change the whole organization. I wanted something a bit more lightweight, which I thought data contracts could be. But also I was thinking about ideas that came from like platform engineering and DevOps, and this idea of, I worked in a data platform team. I was leading a data platform team. So I understood how the platform could enable this decentralization, enable this accountability and responsibility, and even get software engineers to create data contracts and own their data and provide good quality data products to other parts of the business. I felt the platform could do a lot of that work for them. So we're not asking everyone to become data experts and GDPR experts and whatever else it might be. But everyone can create and manage their own data, provide it to our parts of business using the platform, but with decentralizing their ownership and responsibility to those in the business, to those in the domains.
Andrew, thank you for introducing that concept of platform thinking, because ultimately, I think that the very core of a platform is building that sort of reusable set of services that people can then build on. So we build the platform in order for people to build the product. That's sort of the same mindset that an enterprise arc has when they come up with the API standards for how to do authentication, pagination, and so on, for what a data architect has when they come up with standards around schema definition, around how to sort of capture semantics and so on, and what data contracts effectively solves for. So having an organization come together to create these sort of reusable components is basically bringing platform thinking in a maybe tech light, maybe tech heavy, but even so platform thinking way to the organization's data governance landscape.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually what we did when we first built our data contract implementation. Is we built it on our same platform that our software engineers use, our same developer platform. We use the same sort of language to define data contract. It's something called JSON on it, which is a bit weird and random if you haven't heard of it. It's like JSON with extensions and functions. Not something you necessarily choose unless you already had it, but we already had it, and we use it to define our APIs and define our infrastructure as code. So your data contracts just fit alongside that as something the software engineers could use easily, built into a platform. And in that data contract, you chose what components you wanted. Did you want backups? How long do you want them for? Did you want, in our case, it was on Google Cloud. So did you want PubSub? Do you want BigQuery? Do you want both? And if you want both, as a service gets deployed, that syncs them, keeps them in sync, archives data from PubSub to BigQuery. So, and as a software engineer creating this data contract, you don't know you don't need to know what's going on behind the scenes. You're just writing a data contract, and behind the scenes, the platform is automating all that for you.
And both of y'all mentioned the term data mesh. And I know, Omar, you've talked some about that. You were talking about this at our AI dinner we had here in Atlanta the other day. What is a data mesh? Is it an alternative to data contracts? Is it complementary? Talk us through that.
Sure, I can offer some quick thoughts. So the data mesh we can think of is a architecture. It is a sort of proposal for how an organization can build this sort of decentralized form of data analytics landscape that is in a way built around a few different core pillars, but whose implementations greatly vary. So probably at the 2018, 2019 mark or so, this now famous author, of course, Zhamak Dehghani, published this book around the data mesh, laying out these 4 principles. One of the key principles is around bridging the gap between the people who understand the data best, sort of that application team who are building that data, and the business team who understand how to get the most value out of that data, without introducing all of the sort of heaviness of the data lake and the data warehouse teams who are bringing data from A to B, losing business context, but maintaining sort of technical context. So the problem the data mesh effectively solved for is something like 80% of data lakes fail. Similarly high number of data warehouses fail as well. And a number of AI programs as well as BI programs similarly fail. So to bridge those gaps, Zhamak recognized that one of the biggest bottlenecks is in this gap between the people who are creating the data and the people who are sort of consuming the data analytically. So the goal of the data mesh is, why don't we, in a way, decentralize by empowering these people who are producing that data to go one step further and also publish their data in ways that support maybe analytical workflows or operational querying, which is sort of real-time querying at a scale that transactional systems kind of can't support.
Yeah, was that the Databricks AI World event the other day, and they had the head of NCR Voyix, their AI, and he was the analogy he gave is going from like a data swamp, which is probably more related to the 80% that fail, is some analogy to that, but then progressing data lake, data marketplace, and obviously they were talking Databricks with their lake house. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. That's a crazy stat.
I'll kick this to Andrew in a second, but I think one thing to stress as well is a data mesh is only one particular architecture to enable the self-service analytics, but also a data mesh takes on many different forms. So it's one of those where you can sort of, you know it if you see it, but ultimately the implementations vary so much that it motivated John Perrine and Eric Broda to just write a book recently around all of the varying data mesh implementations that they've seen, because they're just so diverse, and a lot of the sort of core principles that Zhamak lays out are great, but still a bit underdefined. So there's a big gap to go from the theory of the data mesh to the practice. And for that reason, it tends to be a bit of an elusive concept. Data contracts can play a role, but they're not necessary in a data mesh, and nor are data meshes necessary for data contracts. You can use data contracts in a different architecture, and you can do data meshes without contracts. But I think Andrew and I would both agree that whatever your architecture is, a data contract is a great way to increase the reliability of your data and then build the more sort of important models and dashboards on top of. Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. Like I said, data contracts are just good practice. Good idea to be applying some discipline to how you create and manage your data. Good idea to describe your data so that you can then create some automations. You can then populate data catalogs. You can then have agreements with your producers and consumers. Whether you're doing data mesh or not, that's still a good idea to have. But if you're doing data mesh, I think you'll find it quite difficult to do data mesh without data contracts. Particularly when you're trying to implement this self-serve data platform, the idea of data mesh, particularly when you're trying to implement the federated computational governance, I think it's called in data mesh, that can be achieved through data contract quite easily. So I think it'd be hard to do those concepts without data contracts. But yeah, data contracts are useful without data mesh as well.
Yeah. And Matt, you'd mentioned the dinner that we had recently. I won't go into it here, but listeners can, of course, reach out at any time. One of the visions that I'd laid out was for an agent mesh. Now, the concept of a mesh is not unique to data. You have something called a service mesh, which in a way prefigured the data mesh. And service mesh comes from that microservice domain-driven design lineage, where the idea is you can take these big APIs and then break them out into smaller reusable components, have individual teams manage them, and then scale up that way. Well, I won't go into too much over here, but I think what we're seeing in the world of Gen AI and LLMs is that as the base models sort of plateau, people are having a chance to sort of build up the stack. And what that enables is teams to build more sort of finely tuned or smaller models that are better at performing certain tasks, and then sort of delegating responsibility across multiple of these agents. And in a way, what we end up creating is akin to an agent mesh, this set of agents, each akin to sort of a microservice, which does like one thing very well and is able to sort of route to other agents because it sort of understands where they are and how to interact with them. So very much similar to the service mesh side of it. There are parallels with the data mesh, but I think they're a little bit harder to see. But anyways, we can get more into that if anyone's interested offline.
But yeah, and I'm sure some listeners are thinking right now, this is the Talking AI podcast. Finally, they're talking about some AI, but I hope listeners are starting to cue into this, that data is the foundation of AI. Without quality data, without data, you don't have quality AI. And I think what's really interesting, Andrew, is like your concept of data contracts came in 2021, which was before the advent of and proliferation of Gen AI with, ChatGPT is kind of the seminal moment. But I'm curious, how has that changed or evolved data contracts? And maybe most specifically, AI is very good at taking a lot of unstructured data. How does that play into the concept of Databricks and just like unstructured as a general topic?
Yeah, I think generally the sort of increased use of AI has made a lot of organizations, a lot of people start thinking about the quality of their data that feeds into that AI, like you mentioned. And also these applications of AI, they tend to be deployed in more critical places in business. So it could be product features, could be internal processes, things that just can't break. I mean, I don't think reporting should be able to break all the time anyway, but like this is another level of reliability that we need. And that's why people are starting to think about things like data contracts, things like data quality, reliability, to make sure that data is dependable enough to serve the models, that has some sort of business outcome that is important after that. So I think that's why data contracts continue to be more widely adopted, is to solve that problem, because the use of data is more important than it has been before. I think when it comes to, the second part of the question was around unstructured data, the data contracts, it's always really been about structured data for me. So it describes the structure of the data and what's in there and how you can use it. But when I think about unstructured data, it's still some metadata around what you want to capture. So like, where is it? What kind of S3 bucket, for example, is it in? Who owns it? What kind of personal data is in there? Can I use it in this particular use case, particular AI use case or not? So those kind of metadata about the data again, that kind of the policies around the data, what you can use it for, what you can't use it for. Those are very important when it comes to creating particularly more explainable AI models. And I think that's a good place where data contracts can help capture information in a, again, human and machine readable format that is owned by the data owner. It's got some version control around it, some change management around it, and it's well defined and well understood.
Nice. Omar, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's a great question, because ultimately what the advent of Gen AI has done is allow people to more easily take advantage of unstructured data that was hitherto primarily intended for human audience. So PDF documents, manuals, scanned images, right? All of these data sources were, for the most part, a bit inaccessible unless you wanted to invest time in like building either your own model or using an open source model to extract natural language and so on. All of that sort of available with a lot lower of a barrier to entry. So that raises important questions as to how do we even talk about the quality, the lineage, and other sort of facets covering the sort of metadata of these unstructured documents. I've been keen to sort of have these conversations. I've been speaking with some folks, including briefly Shashanka Das of Acral Data and the Data Hub. But it seems that there's just a gap in the market. Now, there's a gap in our vernacular, in our concepts, as well as like in the tooling around identifying things like the data quality of PDFs and videos and how we can talk about data readiness and things of that sort. Andrew, do you agree? Are there any sort of tools that you think are letting companies get ahead of that? Because I think that's a really exciting problem space now for enterprises looking to build enterprise-grade RAG systems, for example.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know of any tools personally. I think I agree with you that there's a gap here that needs to be filled by something. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's an interesting problem that I'm sure somebody's trying to work out how to solve, and it'd be interesting to see how we solve that in the next few years.
Yeah, that's the cool thing. I think all of this emerging technology and innovations just creating all these new problem spaces for new solutions to be solved. Two more things for you, Andrew. I'm curious, we were just talking about AI and the explosion of it. Do you see kind of like a meta idea here, AI being used as a tool to help create, maintain data contracts? When you think of, as at the Databricks event yesterday, they were talking about using AI to define like documentation and kind of metadata and things like that. Do you see that being a tool that can be used to make data contracts easier in the adoption of those?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think I've kind of got two opinions here, and they kind of contradictory.
go
So
for it.
one is, but yeah, anything we can do to reduce the adoption effort of creating data contract or modifying data contract through the use of AI. Because these are structured documents that have a structured schema. So a bit like code, you can kind of generate it through AI, and if it doesn't work, you won't be able to submit it to production. It will just fail the checks there. So anything we can do to reduce the effort there is great. One particular idea might be to automatically categorize your data and things like that. So you don't have to categorize it yourself manually. And that's a bit in particular where I'm a bit conflicted because on the one hand, that can save a lot of hours. Like mainly categorizing data is labor intensive. On the other hand, sometimes it's better to have a human there checking the data because AI, if they're not perfect, they are making assumptions. They are categorizing the best they can, but they're not perfect. And if you're in a regulated industry, for example, you're storing personal data or sensitive data, would you want you to risk miscategorizing that because you left it to an AI, or would you want a human to categorize it once when you start creating that data, and then have this platform then know about that? And from then on, that's definitely sensitive data. That's a bank account. That's a national insurance number, or whatever it might be, and make sure you store and process that correctly. Because I suspect if you didn't, if you had some sort of data breach or some sort of incident where your data was miscategorized and you said, the AI said it was fine, but it wasn't, I suspect that wouldn't really be an acceptable answer. So I think
Right.
there are some times where I think it's okay, it's maybe better for a human to be involved. But I
Yeah.
do understand it's a lot of effort potentially if you're doing this from scratch, and AI can certainly help with that, at least maybe as a first pass or something like that.
Yeah, liability still comes back on the human, right? I think that's where is there
Yes.
a human in the loop aspect to this to where you kind of get best of both worlds? And I think that's something that, you kind of have to wade your way through to figure out what's the ideal state. And then the last thing I got, there's probably people listening to this that are like, yes, give me data contracts. This sounds great. I'm wading around through this like murky, like data swamp with lots of fog, like we were talking about earlier. How do you like, what's the logical way to get started other than just reaching out to you directly and getting somebody to, getting you to kind of help walk them through that?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, you need to be clear what problem you're trying to solve with data
Mhm.
contracts. Like myself and I spoke about many different problems you can solve with data contracts. So what is the one you're trying to solve? And often people say, I want to solve data quality and I want something to enforce data quality on my producers. But I'm really starting to use words there like enforce and control, which, and I admit contract is another word, but those kind of words where you're not really encouraging much collaboration. You're already starting off with friction. So I think before you start deploying data contracts, think about problem you're trying to solve, who you want to be creating these data contracts. So is it you as data people, data engineers? Is it software engineers producing data? Is it your Salesforce admin and the data coming from Salesforce, for example? Now think about who it is you want to be creating these data contracts, and then work with them from the start to engage them in the solution, the data contract solution you want to build, making sure that you're building something that they are happy to use and they understand that they are taking this ownership, responsibility, accountability for the data contract, and by extension, the data that's come through that. So that's kind of where I start. I also tend to start small, find a good small use case start. We know, I mean, everyone knows that like these large IT projects, they tend, that don't deliver anything for 18 months. They tend to not be successful. So start small, solve a real problem for the organization, do it with a data contract, build a bit of platform while you're doing that, then do the next problem, and you start to show the value early and often while building out your capability as well.
No, that's great. Well, Andrew, thanks for being on the Talking AI podcast. So a couple of things here, and I'll let you kind of go through the spiel, but you wrote a book on this. It's on Amazon. Tell us where people can find you, where they can reach out. I know you have a great newsletter. Give us the spiel of how people can reach out to you.
Yes, I wrote a book. It came out last summer and it's available at Amazon and wherever else you get books. But if you go to data-contracts.com, you'll find all the links there and all the information about the book. If you're looking for something a bit easier to digest, or you're new to data contracts, more of an overview, an introduction, then I wrote a free white paper on data contracts recently. You can get that from dc101.io. So that's DC for data contracts 101, the numbers 101.io. And that's a summary of what data contracts are and how you can use them to solve problems. And then, as you mentioned, I've got my newsletter as well. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. And if you go to andrew-jones.com, you'll find all the links to my newsletter and my LinkedIn and wherever else I post on there.
Nice. That's awesome. And we also have on the HatchWorks AI side, we have a lab coming up, effectively a webinar on bridging the governance gap with data contracts on Databricks on December the 19th. If you're listening to this before that date, come join us, come check it out. We'll have Omar and a couple other folks in there. It's going to be a really interesting and fun chat. But thanks guys for being on the Talking AI podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com. Do you already have a Gen AI use case in mind for your business, but don't know where to get started? HatchWorks Gen AI Accelerator is exactly what you need. We guide you from ideation to a tangible prototype. Our approach provides a low-risk, high-value pathway for you to validate and test Gen AI technology on a small scale before committing to full production. We take you through technology and LLM selection, perform data preparation, and then build the actual prototype. And then we do testing and model fine-tuning of your prototype. The best part is we get you to this prototype in just 2 to 8 weeks based on the scope of your use case. Check out the link in the show notes or visit hatchworks.com to get started today.